Most posters on a school wall don't change lives. They're just there. Birthday announcements, cafeteria menus, missing pencil cases. But this one had no staple holes, no curled edges, no name. It looked too new, too deliberate. And the canine named Ranger wouldn't stop growling at it. It was supposed to be just another routine safety sweep at Willow Creek Elementary. Officer Thomas Grady, 39, had done hundreds of these over his career, checking doors, walking the halls, keeping a friendly presence for the kids. Nothing more than a precaution. But today, Ranger, his newly partnered K9, a golden-coated German shepherd with intense amber eyes and a habit of sniffing too long, started acting strange outside classroom 3B. He didn't bark. He didn't scratch the floor. He stopped dead, stared at a rainbow-colored motivational poster taped near the water fountain, and let out a low, guttural growl that made the teacher inside freeze mid-sentence. Grady frowned. "What is it, boy?" Ranger took a step forward and scratched the wall below the poster. Then again and again. Harder. The noise echoed through the quiet hallway like drum beats in a church. Grady walked over, knelt beside Ranger, and reached for the edge of the poster. The moment his fingers curled around the paper, Ranger began to bark. Deep, furious, loud. Not the playful bark he used when fetching balls for the local kids. This was the bark of warning, of danger. The hallway seemed to shrink around them. Grady yanked the poster off, and behind it, not drywall, not concrete, was a seam. A rectangle, a hidden door. The paint on the wall didn't match. The edges were too perfect, fresh, like someone had recently built it into the wall and disguised it with the most innocent cover imaginable. A child's poster. Grady took a step back. "We need backup," he muttered into his radio. "Willow Creek Elementary, southeast hallway. Possible concealed door behind false wall. Suspected foul play." Within minutes, the hallway was swarming with activity. Teachers were ushering students into classrooms. A second officer, Detective Nina Morales, arrived and knelt beside the wall. She traced the edges of the hidden panel with her flashlight. "There's something behind here," she whispered. "Soundproof padding, maybe." "Listen." She knocked twice. No echo, just a dull thud. Ranger was now scratching furiously. Not barking, just scratching. His eyes locked on the hidden door like a predator waiting for a signal. It was Morales who noticed it first. A faint outline along the baseboard, almost invisible. She pulled out her multi-tool and began to pry. A tiny click echoed through the air, and the wall creaked open. Grady instinctively reached for his weapon. The door swung inward. A narrow staircase descended into the dark. The air that came out was cold. Too cold. Not like a school basement, but like something buried far below where it should be, and it smelled faintly of bleach and something else. Fear. Morales turned on her body cam. "We're going down." "I'm going first," Grady said. He glanced at Ranger. With him. The stairwell creaked under their weight. Every step felt like a warning. The silence below wasn't empty. It was full of tension, like the air itself was waiting to exhale. At the bottom was a steel door, reinforced with a keypad. "Someone built this recently," Grady said. "This wasn't here when the school was built." "Not a chance," Morales replied. "This is custom work, expensive." Grady tapped the door. No sound, completely deadened. "Soundproof," he muttered. Ranger was growling again. Now pacing, his hackles were up. Morales checked the walls. "There's no handle." Ranger stopped pacing. Then he barked once, hard, then again. And suddenly, from behind the door, a sound, a muffled cry, very faint, but unmistakable. A child's voice. Morales' eyes widened. "There's someone in there." Grady didn't hesitate. He reached for his radio. "This is Officer Grady. We have auditory confirmation of a child behind a locked, soundproof door beneath Willow Creek Elementary. Request immediate forced entry and child services." Then to Morales, "I'm cutting it open." The bolt cutter kit was already in his bag. With practiced hands, Grady wedged the tool against the lock panel. Sparks flew. 10 seconds later, the steel groaned open. Inside was a room no bigger than a utility closet. Every inch was lined with dark gray acoustic foam. The lights inside were dim, flickering. And in the middle of the room, curled together on a thin blanket, were two children. Twins, a boy and a girl, no older than 6, shivering, eyes wide, tape still clinging to their wrists. Grady dropped to his knees. Hey, it's okay. You're safe now." The boy whimpered. The girl just stared at him like she didn't believe he was real. Morales gently peeled the tape from the boy's wrists. "We've got to get them checked." But Ranger didn't move. He was staring at the far wall. Another seam. Another panel. Grady's breath caught. You've got to be kidding me. Before he could reach it, Ranger was already digging. Behind the wall, they would later find documents. Photos. Names. Dates. It wasn't just these two kids. It was a list of many more. The silence in the room was oppressive. Officer Grady could feel it in his chest, like the air was too thick to breathe. The two children they just pulled out were now wrapped in emergency blankets, clutching water bottles handed to them by paramedics. They hadn't said a word. But Ranger wasn't done. His paws scraped again at the second wall, where that hidden panel waited. Morales moved to intercept him, crouching low, flashlight sweeping across the surface. It's not just drywall, she whispered. You feel that? Foam padding. Grady pressed his palm flat against it. It didn't bounce back like standard insulation. It felt dense, industrial, designed to keep something in or out. Morales stood up, jaw tight. This wasn't just a hiding place. Someone built this. Built it to disappear, Grady muttered. No handles, no hinges, no sound leaks, no blueprint. They stepped back as the forensic team took over. Crime scene techs in dark jackets moved in with fiber lights and scanners. One of them, a wiry guy named Lex, waved Grady over. You're going to want to see this, Lex said, pointing to a tablet. We pulled up the school's original architectural blueprints. The space behind this wall, it doesn't exist. On paper, it's just wall. Grady's brow furrowed. How far back do those prints go? 1953, all the way to the last renovation 5 years ago. Nothing shows this chamber. Morales crossed her arms, lips pressed into a line. So someone either bribed the contractor or did this off the books. Recently, Ranger began pacing again. Not frantically, methodically, sniffing corners, moving with purpose. He stopped at the far corner of the room, just below a wall-mounted shelf covered in dust. There he scratched once, then sat. Grady knew that posture. Another seam? They examined the wall behind the shelf and found it. Faint lines, barely perceptible, leading down to the floor. Another false door. But this one wasn't vertical. It was on the floor, a trap door. It took 2 officers and a crowbar to pry it up. The hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. Grady leaned in first, flashlight catching a metal ladder disappearing into darkness. No way this is part of school construction, Morales said. You don't build a school with tunnels like this. Not legally, you don't. They dropped a signal line and descended. Ranger was first, steady, silent, alert. The tunnel below was narrow and damp, with aging bricks along the walls and foam sheets lining the ceiling. It felt suffocating, like crawling through the inside of a sealed box. At the end of the tunnel, another door. Not just any door. It was steel, with a sliding hatch. Grady's flashlight caught something etched into the paint near the top. A tally. 5 vertical lines, then 5 more, then 7, all carved with something sharp. Initials too. Childish handwriting. JT Maya WZCAS. Grady's stomach turned. They were keeping count. Morales pushed the sliding window open. It was pitch black inside, then a flicker. Something moved. A faint clatter of metal. Did you see that? She whispered. Grady nodded, heart racing. There's someone in there. They forced the door. It swung open into a chamber twice the size of the first one. The walls were the same, foam-lined, dull gray, no windows. But this room was empty. Almost. In the corner, just barely illuminated by Grady's flashlight, were more clues. A dusty cot, a child's sneaker, an empty protein bar wrapper, and a stack of hand-drawn pictures. Dozens of them, crayon on the school paper. Grady flipped through the stack. A picture of the school, a drawing of the gym, a man's figure with a blurry face, always shaded in gray, with a circle where the face should be. Then one image stopped him cold. A staircase going down, beneath the school, with the words, "Quiet rooms below." Morales picked up a plastic water bottle and frowned. Expiration date's recent. This wasn't abandoned long ago, which means someone's been coming back. Ranger growled softly, then barked. He stood at the vent on the far wall, not just barking, pawing again, as if the wall itself was lying. Lex's voice came through the radio. We just ran fiber sweeps on the upper walls. You're not going to believe this, but there's air movement. That foam padding you're seeing, it's layered over a reinforced sheetrock. This place was built like a vault. A vault to store kids, Morales said bitterly. Ranger's paws hit the floor again, now at the base of a bolted-down desk. Grady crouched. Another panel? Morales asked. He reached beneath the desk. No, it's the floor this time. Sure enough, beneath the desk's base was a movable panel, but it wasn't obvious. The bolts were fake. The wood screws had been countersunk to hide a release latch. Grady popped it. The tile swung upward with a sharp click. A gust of colder air wafted up, and another tunnel stretched out beneath them, Jura more decayed. Morales raised a brow. Where the hell does this go? Grady looked at Ranger, who was already halfway down. We follow him. Back in the main building, chaos reigned. The children found earlier had been rushed to the hospital for trauma response and full medical screening. No one had spoken much, not until the youngest, a girl with a bruised wrist and tangled black hair, whispered something to the social worker at the hospital. The girl's name was Maya. She was 9. The name rang a bell. Grady was holding one of the school's missing person files when his phone buzzed. Morales was calling from the tunnel. You need to see this, she said, voice tight. I'm en route. What did you find? A room. He stopped walking. Another? A boiler room, but it's not on the blueprint. Grady arrived minutes later, descending the second tunnel with 2 officers in tow. The boiler room was rusted, ancient, long since disconnected from the school's heating system, but wedged behind an old pipe casing was a crate. It wasn't empty. Inside were folded children's clothes sorted by size, 3 unopened boxes of granola bars, water jugs half full, a clipboard. Grady picked it up. The clipboard had a schedule, times, dates, notes like check vent 3, rotate mattress, and worst of all, group 2, relocated. There were more, Morales whispered. Grady felt sick. He had a system, and he's still using it. She held up a bagged print swab. Fingerprints, fresh, less than 48 hours old. Grady froze. He's coming back. Before anyone could speak, the radio crackled again. This is dispatch. Officer Simmons reporting strange noise in the gym wall. Another dog on site is barking at a poster, requesting immediate support. Grady turned slowly to Morales. Another poster? The gymnasium was eerily quiet. Normally, this part of Willow Creek Elementary echoed with bouncing basketballs, squeaking sneakers, and kids laughing too loud during recess. But tonight, the only sounds were Ranger's sharp barks and the shuffle of tactical boots against polished wood. Officer Thomas Grady stood at the far end of the gym, heart thudding, watching Ranger scratch relentlessly at another school poster. This one depicting a cartoon bear wearing a whistle and pointing at a scoreboard. The slogan read, "Play fair, stay safe." Ranger had his teeth bared. No growl, just focused urgency. Grady exchanged a look with Detective Morales. Deja vu? She nodded. Too familiar. Morales pulled the poster off slowly, and there it was again. Another seam in the wall. Fresh paint. Precision cut. But this one had no lock, no keypad, no resistance. Just a recessed grip and a smooth glide. Grady raised his flashlight and opened it. Behind the false wall was a narrow stairwell leading down. The air that rushed up was colder than before, dense and metallic, like old blood and bleach. Ranger didn't wait. He darted down the stairs, nails clacking against the concrete steps. Grady followed fast, Morales and 2 other officers close behind. Halfway down, the temperature dropped again. It wasn't just cold, it was silent. So silent that even the softest breath felt loud. The staircase ended in a heavy steel door. It had no markings, just one small, rectangular viewing panel covered with smudged glass. Morales wiped it clean, then froze. Grady stepped beside her and looked in. The room beyond was bigger than the others, nearly classroom-sized. Foam-padded walls, no windows, but brighter lighting. The walls were painted a sickly off-white, some sections stained with water damage or smudges they didn't want to name. And in the far corner, barely visible through the glass, was a child. A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, curled up on the floor in a gray sweatshirt 3 sizes too big. Her hair was matted, her knees were pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped around something that glinted. A small metal school bell. Grady knocked softly on the glass. No reaction. She's asleep? Morales whispered. Grady stared harder. The girl's chest moved, shallow but steady. She's breathing, but not conscious. Morales tried the door, locked tight. She pulled a set of emergency tools from her satchel and went to work on the hinges. Grady turned to the team. Radio medical. Tell them we've got a live child in a sealed basement room. No injuries visible, but she may be drugged. Unknown duration of exposure. We need a trauma team on standby. It took 3 minutes to get the door open. When they entered, every officer stopped moving. The acoustics were unnatural, like their footsteps were being swallowed. No echoes, no ambient sound, just the hum of a single flickering fluorescent light overhead. Grady knelt by the girl. "Hey, sweetheart, you're okay now. You're safe." She didn't wake. He gently lifted her into his arms. Her body was limp, but not lifeless. The bell in her hand clanged faintly, then slipped to the floor. Titan picked it up in his teeth and laid it down beside her, then sat next to Grady without a sound, never taking his eyes off the child. Morales scanned the room. Her flashlight caught something scrawled on the far wall, written in chalk across the foam. 4 words. They learned to stay silent. Grady felt his throat tighten. Jesus. Morales opened a small cabinet in the corner. Inside were neatly stacked notebooks, all with blank covers. She pulled one open. They weren't blank. Inside were dozens of handwritten pages. Childlike handwriting. Names, routines, messages. Today he didn't come. No food. Be quiet. Quiet is safe. If the bell rings, we hide. Grady looked toward the far corner of the room. One chair, facing the wall, empty now, but cold in the way only something watched too long can feel. This wasn't just a holding room. It was conditioning, control. Outside, the storm was picking up. Ambulance lights danced against the walls as medical teams carried the unconscious girl, later identified as Emily Rhodes, age 7, missing from the neighboring town of Fair Lake, out of the school. She hadn't been listed among the original missing kids. Her photo had never circulated. Grady found himself wondering how many others hadn't made it onto a flyer, or were still here, somewhere. Back inside, forensic techs flooded the gym stairwell. One technician named Kyle waved them over. "We got partial prints all over the staircase railing," he said. "Same match as the ones on the crate in the boiler room." "Same guy," Morales said, jaw clenched. "Same system, different room." "There's more," Kyle added. "We traced the power feed running into this room. It's not tied into the school's grid. Someone spliced into an external line, probably during the renovations 5 years ago. Entirely off book. And the foam? Top-grade soundproofing. Same type used in interrogation facilities." Grady nodded grimly. Someone had the budget and the knowledge. And the access. His thoughts shifted back to that drawing they'd found. The man in a school uniform with no face. Morales pulled out her phone and brought up the image of the yearbook staff photo again. One face stood out. It wasn't just blurred. It was intentionally smudged, tampered. "We need a list of every person who worked in this building the year that photo was taken," she said. "Full names, employment records, background checks. Focus on custodians, temp hires, contractors." Grady added, "And cross-check with anyone who wasn't background verified. Gaps, aliases, anything." Ranger barked once, then again. He stood staring at the closed trapdoor they'd come through. Grady knelt beside him. "You hear something, boy?" Ranger tilted his head, then growled. Deep, low. Morales lifted her radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Morales. We may not be alone in the building." They swept the school again. Classrooms, closets, maintenance tunnels. Nothing. But Ranger stayed alert, tense, focused. He kept circling near the west wing, the area closest to the old loading dock and faculty parking lot. That's when Officer Simmons, who'd stayed outside with the ambulance crew, came over breathless. "You guys are going to want to see this." Out back near the dumpster enclosure was a fresh set of boot prints in the mud. Adult male, deep treads, recent. They led to the fence line and ended abruptly. No return path. Just one direction, out. Someone had been watching. Grady stared at the fence, then at the dark woods beyond. He was here tonight. They returned to the command center, piecing together what they knew. 8 missing children, now 6 found, but at least 2 unaccounted for, and possibly more. The patterns on the clipboard, the rotation of groups, the logistics of it all. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was a system, a hidden infrastructure right beneath the feet of teachers, parents, and students, in a place meant to be safe. Ranger lay quietly at Grady's side, but his eyes never left the school floor. Grady reached down, scratched behind the dog's ears, and whispered, "We're not done, buddy." Because somewhere, someone was planning the next room. The following morning, Willow Creek Elementary was sealed off like a crime scene from a movie. News vans lined the outer perimeter. Parents stood behind barricades holding signs, some screaming at the officers for answers. Others just cried. But inside the school, everything was silent again. Detective Nina Morellis hadn't slept. Neither had Officer Thomas Grady. Ranger, their golden-coated K9, had curled up for only a few hours before rising at the first hint of movement, his body still tense, his ears still on alert. Because something about this whole thing wasn't finished. Not even close. "Let me see that crate again," Grady said, already halfway down the stairwell toward the boiler room. Morales followed with a clipboard in hand. "You're thinking what I'm thinking?" "That we didn't find where it starts," he said. "We found where it ends." The boiler room was damp and dim, the air smelling of rust and something bitter, like scorched metal. The crate sat exactly where they'd left it, wedged behind corroded pipes, almost hidden by age. Grady pulled it out and started unpacking it methodically. The children's clothing was clean and folded. The food bars hadn't expired. The jugs of water were full and cool to the touch. But it was the clipboard that he focused on. The schedule had dates going back 6 months. Some were crossed out. Others were marked with stars or underlined. One entry read, "G2 rotate, quiet." Another simply said, "MW last visit." Morales pointed to the initials. "Maya Williams. That's the girl from yesterday." Grady scanned further down the sheet. The last entry was dated just 2 days ago. "Check F3 vent, swap crate, wipe down." "This was used recently," he muttered. He was preparing or transitioning. "To what?" Morales asked. Grady didn't answer, because Ranger started barking again. He wasn't in the boiler room. His barks echoed from the hallway beyond. Grady sprinted toward the sound, following the reverberation down a narrow corridor that wrapped behind the gym. Ranger was there, front paws braced against the ground, claws scratching at the linoleum beneath an old supply desk bolted to the floor. Grady dropped to one knee. "What do you smell, boy?" Ranger barked once. Morales caught up, breathless. "Another vent?" "More like a tunnel." Grady pulled out his multi-tool and began unscrewing the desk mount. With each twist, something shifted beneath. Dust floated in the air like ash. Finally, the desk gave way. Beneath it was a panel, flat, cold steel, with 4 recessed bolts and a sliding hatch. "A third access point," Morales whispered. "How deep does this go?" They opened it. The shaft below was narrower than the others, barely wide enough for an adult to crawl through. But there were handholds, metal rungs bolted into the walls, and fresh footprints in the dust. Small ones, kids' sizes. Grady didn't wait. He clicked on his shoulder lamp and began climbing down. Morales stayed topside, guiding the backup team on radio. The shaft led to a narrow crawl space that opened into a larger chamber. Rough-hewn walls, jagged bricks, and the remnants of something terrible. Old bed frames, a broken plastic chair, a pile of child-sized shoes worn and dirty. And on the wall, in chalk again, scrawled in shaky letters. He said, "Quiet kids don't get taken." Grady backed out quickly, heart hammering. "This place is older," he radioed. "Way older. It predates the renovations." Morales' voice crackled back. "Could have been part of the original foundation. Maybe a bomb shelter from the 50s? "Maybe," Grady replied, "but it's been used recently." Ranger barked again, "Upstairs now." When Grady climbed back up, Morales was already kneeling beside Ranger. The dog was sniffing the side panel of a janitor's cart left in the hallway. At first glance, it looked like any other cleaning cart. Mop bucket, gloves, bleach bottles, dusters, until Morales opened the side drawer and found a key ring. One of the keys was marked F3, another was marked Maya. Grady took a deep breath. He worked here. Recently. Morales was already dialing dispatch. "I want every name, every temp custodian, overnight maintenance worker, groundskeeper, pest control contractor. Anyone who had unsupervised access in the last 2 years." She turned to Grady. "We've got 'em all." 3 hours later, they were in the principal's office. Principal Reed, a man in his late 50s with thin gray hair and red-rimmed eyes, was trembling as he handed over the staff files. "We do background checks. Always. This can't be happening here." "It is," Morales said firmly. And it did. Grady flipped through the records, stopping at a file for Benjamin Rowe, listed as a part-time facilities contractor, brought on during the HVAC overhaul last spring. The attached photo had no face, just a barcode. The badge number was faded. Reed looked baffled. I don't remember him." Grady stared at the entry logs. Roque had signed in 37 times over a 3-month period, almost always late at night. Access granted through a staff member's override code. "What's this override tied to?" Grady asked. Reed swallowed hard. "That's my assistant. She left for maternity leave in June." "No one ever changed her code?" Reed shook his head. "No, we didn't think." Morales stood. You didn't think someone could walk through the front door holding a mop and take your children? Silence. Then the phone rang. Grady picked it up. It was the hospital. Maya was awake. She was small for her age, pale, eyes sunken but sharp. Grady knelt beside her hospital bed. Morales stood near the door, giving them space. Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. He picked which days to visit. Grady leaned closer. Do you know his name? She shook her head. He never said. Can you describe him? Another shake. He had a mask sometimes, sometimes not, but he wore the same coat. What kind of coat? She pointed to the TV screen across the room where a nurse in a navy blue fleece vest was walking past. Like that, but with a patch, a red bird. Morales stiffened. Redbird HVAC, a subcontractor. Grady stood fast. We've got him. Back at the school, officers searched every vent, every duct, every hallway. Then, in the West Wing faculty lounge, Ranger barked again. Inside a utility closet, behind a false panel, they found another stash. Burn phones, zip ties, sleeping pills, a spiral-bound notebook filled with names and drawings. Morales flipped it open. Page after page of kids' sketches, smiley faces, buildings. Then a final image. A stairwell, descending, much deeper than the others. At the bottom, the sketch of a door. And next to it, written in shaky handwriting. They're still down there. Detective Nina Morales stood frozen with the notebook in her hand. The crude drawing on the final page stared back at her, a staircase going even deeper. Below it, a rectangle labeled simply door. And beside the door, stick figures, thin and small, with circles for heads and no eyes. They're still down there. She read the words again, trying to shake the chill that crept up her spine. It wasn't just a kid's imagination. Every drawing they'd seen so far, every page found in vents, lockers, or makeshift rooms, had led them to something real. Officer Thomas Grady took the notebook from her carefully, holding it like a sacred object. Ranger, his loyal canine, sat at his side, his ears perked and head tilted. He's trying to tell us something, Grady said softly. Whoever drew this, they didn't just escape. They left a trail. Or a warning, Morales muttered. The spiral notebook had been tucked inside a plastic container, found in a false panel within the West Wing faculty lounge closet, along with disposable gloves, burner phones, and notes about shifts and checkpoints. Grady flipped to the previous page, a drawing of a man in a school staff uniform. But his face was just a blank oval. No features, no eyes, no mouth, just a square badge drawn on his chest with the word hello scribbled where a name should be. Morales glanced over. We've seen him before. Same sketch was in Maya's backpack. And in the others, Grady said, they all saw him. Ranger barked once, then again louder. He stood and stared at the floor near the baseboard heater behind the lounge couch. Morales followed him, pulling the couch back. There it was, a thin scratch line in the floor tiles, curved slightly with fingerprints smudged in the dust. Hidden hatch, she said, just like the others. Grady knelt and pried it up. A faint hiss of air escaped from the seam. Another tunnel. It took the full response team almost an hour to stabilize the shaft and send a drone down. The feed showed a long, descending corridor. Brick walls, old wiring, spider webs. But about 50 feet in, the camera froze. Signal interference, one of the techs said. We're picking up a localized jamming field. It's weak, but enough to scramble the feed. Grady looked at Morales. Someone didn't want this place found. Let's ruin their plan. They went in manually. Flashlights, masks, protective vests. Ranger led the way. The air grew colder the farther they walked. Not from weather, from design. The ventilation had been shut off. Mold clung to the walls. Pipes creaked above them. And then they reached it. The door. It wasn't like the others. This one was solid steel, military grade, with a coded entry pad, a biometric scanner, and no markings. But someone had tried to cover it, crudely with an old student art poster that had been glued over the surface. It showed cartoon animals in a schoolyard, a rabbit reading, a bear eating lunch, a raccoon holding hands with a squirrel. Only when Morales stepped closer did she see what was wrong. Each animal's face had been scratched out. All of them. And in the corner of the poster in thick red crayon, the quiet ones stay. Grady didn't wait. We need breach tools. Within minutes, the team had called in portable cutting saws, an oxygen-fed torch, and a reinforced ram. While they worked, Grady turned to Morales. You think there's really more kids down there? She looked at the poster again, then back at the crude map in the notebook. I think we've only scratched the surface. When the door finally gave way, the screech of metal rang out like a scream. Inside was a wide chamber, maybe 40 feet across. It looked like a bomb shelter. Cinder block walls, stripped floors, fluorescent lighting barely functioning. There were desks, classroom desks, lined in rows, and one chair, alone, facing the corner. Morales whispered, "He made them play school down here?" Grady moved cautiously toward the far side of the room. On the walls were more drawings, taped up, childlike, some crumpled, others neat. One showed a tree with dozens of stick figure kids hanging from the branches by lines. Maybe ropes, maybe not. Another showed a calendar with X's across certain days. In red ink, Grady found a clipboard on the desk in the corner. More schedules. One line caught his eye. Subject 6, final rotation pending. Then, from behind the last row of desks, a faint sound, like fabric rustling. Ranger barked, low, sharp. Grady moved fast, pulling a desk aside. There, huddled in a recess in the wall, was a girl, maybe 10. Her eyes wide, she flinched at the light. "It's okay," Grady said, kneeling. "We're police, you're safe now." She didn't answer, just kept clutching a stained fleece blanket and a spiral drawing pad held tight to her chest. Morales approached slowly, offering a bottle of water. The girl didn't blink, but she pointed at the far wall. Grady turned his flashlight. There was another seam in the cinder block. Faint, almost invisible. A second door. This one wasn't locked. When they opened it, they found what looked like an observation room, a wall of one-way glass facing into the classroom chamber. A swivel chair, a security monitor system, all powered off. But beside it, a corkboard. Photos pinned to it. Kids, some matched the ones they'd rescued. Others didn't. Morales counted quickly. "There are 23 faces here." "We've only found 6, Grady said. His stomach turned. Pinned in the center of the board was a single sticky note. All it said was, "He took the others, but I kept him." Morales stared at it. "What does that mean?" Grady shook his head. "I don't know." Then Ranger growled, loud and long, at a vent in the corner. Grady pulled the grate open. Inside, folded neatly, was a uniform. School issued, janitor's logo on the back. But inside the breast pocket, tucked behind a pair of rubber gloves, was a drawing. Done in crayon, by a child. It showed a stick figure adult, one hand raised, the other holding a leash. On the leash was a dog. And in the background, a school hallway. But the adult was crossed out in red, and the dog was circled in green. Beneath the drawing, written in shaky hand, the dog never stopped looking. Back above ground, EMTs took the 10th girl, identified later as Jasmine Burke, missing for 4 months, into custody for care and recovery. She never let go of that blanket, or the drawing pad. Inside it were sketches of a figure she called the Picker. He never showed his face, only his gloves, and the sound of the bell before he chose. Grady and Morales stood outside the school as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. "You think we found them all?" Morales asked quietly. Grady shook his head. "No, I think someone else was helping him, and that he kept one." Ranger stared toward the tree line behind the school, as if he knew something still wasn't right. Morales nodded toward the woods. "You think there's more?" "I think," Grady said, "Ranger's going to tell us before anyone else does." Ranger wouldn't stop staring at the woods. Even as the sun dipped low behind the treetops, casting the school grounds in long orange shadows, his posture remained fixed, ears stiff, body taut, tail unmoving. He let out a single low growl deep in his chest like thunder before the storm. Officer Thomas Grady felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. "He's never done that before," he said quietly, standing beside Detective Nina Morales near the edge of the school parking lot. "It's not a threat growl, it's like he's waiting." "For something to come out of those trees?" Morales asked. Grady shook his head. "No, like something's still in there." Behind them, the school was quiet again, sealed off and empty. The rescued girl, Jasmine Burke, had been taken to the hospital hours ago, and her sketchbook was now part of the official case file. But Ranger's behavior hadn't changed. He hadn't left that spot. Morales checked her phone. "Crime scene texts are done with the lower chamber. They're sending the rest of the photos now." She paused, staring down at a new image. "Tom, look at this." Grady leaned in. It was a photo of the corkboard they'd found in the observation room, the one with the 23 pinned photographs. Children, some confirmed rescues, others still unknown. But in the upper right corner, almost hidden beneath a curling post-it, was a face he recognized. "Oh my God," he said, "that's Principal Reed's nephew," Morales finished. "Aiden Harwell. He went missing 2 years ago. supposedly vanished during a camping trip out in Crescent Ridge. It was ruled unrelated. Grady's hands curled into fists. They had us looking in the woods, not under the school. But why lie, Morales muttered. Unless Reed, Grady cut her off. Let's not jump there yet, but we need to bring him in for questioning, tonight. Before Morales could reply, Ranger barked. Once, sharp, urgent. Then again, Grady spun. Ranger had moved to the back corner of the parking lot near a fenced utility shed. The shed had been locked for years, used mostly for old gym equipment. But now Ranger was clawing at the latch like something was inside. Grady ran over, hand on his sidearm. Morales followed. You got keys? Forget keys, Grady muttered, pulling the bolt cutters from the cruiser. The chain snapped easily. They swung the door open. Inside, behind a stack of dusty orange cones and torn soccer nets, was another crate. Steel reinforced, with air holes. Ranger sat and stared at it, unmoving. Morales pushed past the clutter and opened the crate's latch. Inside were child-sized sneakers, a box of peanut butter granola bars, 2 water bottles, a folded hoodie, and a clipboard. Again, Grady lifted it carefully. On the top sheet were hand-drawn initials. LT, MR. Sammy. One had a check mark. The others didn't. Morales swallowed. This was another rotation crate. Grady turned to her, voice grave. That means we're still missing at least one. Later that night, they interviewed Maya again. The 9-year-old had spoken very little since her rescue, but the hospital trauma team had made progress. Gentle exposure therapy, coloring books, soft music. She sat in a quiet recovery room, bundled in a blanket too big for her, staring at a stuffed bear that someone had brought from the PD. Grady crouched beside her. Hi again, Maya, remember me? She nodded once, eyes barely meeting his. You did something really brave, leaving those drawings. They helped us find the others. Another nod. I wanted to ask about someone. You might know him. His name's Sammy, or maybe Sam. Her lip trembled slightly. Morales stepped in slowly, offering a paper and crayon. Do you think you could draw him for us? It took her a moment. Then she began to scribble. First, a staircase. Then a small figure in the corner, curled up. She tapped it twice. Sammy, she whispered. Is he still there? Grady asked gently. She nodded, then added something. A door. And this time above it, she wrote, he's in the one without a lock. It didn't make sense at first. Every room they'd found so far had been locked. Reinforced, hidden, secure. But this clue changed everything. Think about it, Morales said, driving back toward the school. He's smarter than we thought. He'd anticipate we'd eventually get through his locks. So what's the one place no one would ever bother checking? A room that doesn't look like it's locked at all, Grady finished, because it's not supposed to hold anything. Back at the school, they returned to the main level. Ranger led the way again, nose to the ground, darting past the library, the admin offices, until he stopped at the old music room. It hadn't been used in over a year. Budget cuts had forced the program out. Dust covered the instrument shelves. Cobwebs curled around the windows. But at the back of the room was a small janitor's closet. Unlocked, Grady opened it slowly. Empty shelves, cleaning supplies, mop buckets. But Ranger walked in, then barked once, and sat. Grady knelt. The closet was too shallow to hide much, but the back panel felt off. The wood was too new, and there was a seam near the base. He pried at it gently. The panel swung open, revealing a crawl space. Small, cramped, cold. And at the far end, a child, no older than 7, eyes wide, hands trembling. He held a drawing in one hand, and in the other, a toy police badge. Grady's voice cracked. Hey, buddy, I'm Officer Tom. You're safe now. The boy didn't speak. He just blinked, then looked past Grady to Ranger, and smiled. His name was Sammy Elleridge, age 7. He'd been reported missing 4 months earlier from a community center across town. His parents had been searching ever since. No leads, no suspects. Until tonight, Grady carried him outside into the flood of ambulance lights. The boy never stopped clutching the toy badge, and Ranger never left his side. As the paramedics took over, Morales turned to Grady. That was the last one on Maya's list, but not the last name on that clipboard, he said quietly. Because one box was still checked. Just one, and it didn't say missing. It said, relocated. That night, Ranger sat quietly by the cruiser as Grady scrolled through old district staff rosters. One name kept coming up, Glenn Fisher. He'd been a substitute custodian, worked nights, no permanent address, falsified social security number. And he disappeared 2 weeks ago. No forwarding contact, no exit paperwork. Glenn Fisher isn't real, Grady said. Morales nodded. And he's not done. As they packed up for the night, Morales paused near the front door of the school. One last poster remained taped to the hallway bulletin board. It read, "Safety starts with you." Except now, someone had scribbled something underneath it in red marker. 3 words, "You never saw." It was well past midnight when Officer Thomas Grady pulled back into the parking lot of Willow Creek Elementary. The floodlights cast long shadows over the building's brick walls, and the wind carried a bite that warned of colder nights ahead. Ranger sat in the back seat, alert but quiet. His ears perked as if he too sensed that something was unresolved. Because it was. They had rescued 10 children, identified 23, recovered drawings, journals, names, and even a handwritten schedule. But one line still burned in Grady's mind. "He took the others, but I kept him." It wasn't a warning. It was a message. Whoever had written it hadn't fled the scene in a panic. He had made a choice, and someone had been left behind. Inside the school, Detective Nina Morales was already waiting by the gym doors, flashlight in hand. Her coat was zipped up high and she looked tired, but not ready to rest. "Reed's still missing," she said without preamble. "No one's seen him since yesterday." "Principal Reed?" She nodded. "His car's not at home. Phone's off. His wife says he left to go for a walk. Never came back." Grady clenched his jaw. "We should have brought him in when we had the chance." Morales looked toward the building. "I think he's still here." Grady blinked. "You think he came back?" She gave a tight nod. "I think he never left." Ranger led the way through the front doors. Everything was still. The hallways dimly lit by emergency bulbs, the smell of cleaning solutions still lingering from the janitorial sweep earlier that day. And then it happened. Ding! A single faint bell rang out from deep within the school. It wasn't the fire bell, not the class change bell. It was manual, and it echoed. Grady froze. Morales stared at him. "That came from the lower level," she whispered. Grady didn't hesitate. "Let's move." The team descended the main stairwell, past the gymnasium, down the familiar access tunnel toward the hidden classroom chamber, the one filled with soundproof walls, scratched desks, and old drawings. But the door to the observation room was open, wide open, and Ranger stopped just outside it, growling. Inside, the swivel chair was turned toward the one-way glass, and seated in it was Principal Harold Reed. But it wasn't the man they knew. His face was pale, sunken, his eyes hollowed with dark rings. His hands trembled over the arms of the chair, where faint marks showed he'd tied himself down with cords, then cut them loose. Morales raised her weapon. "Don't move!" He didn't. Grady stepped in slowly. "Mr. Reed, you need to come with us." Reed didn't look away from the glass. He stared into the empty classroom, the desks still lined up neatly, as if waiting for students. "They were quiet," he whispered. "Who?" Morales asked. "The ones they forgot," Reed said. "The kids nobody came looking for. No photos, no names on the news. The quiet ones always stayed longer." Grady felt sick. "You helped him." Reed gave a faint smile. "I built the rooms, but he picked who went inside. He promised they wouldn't be hurt. Just kept until they were ready." "Ready for what?" Morales asked. Reed didn't answer. Instead, he turned slowly in the chair. In his lap sat the school bell, the same one that had been found in Emily Rhodes's hands. He held it delicately, like it meant something sacred. Grady took a step forward. "Put it down, Harold." Reed's fingers curled tighter around the bell. "He left me one. Just one." Morales moved beside him, lowering her voice. "Who?" Reed finally looked up. "The boy with the scar," he said. "He never spoke, never cried. I didn't even know his name." Grady's stomach dropped. "Where is he?" Reed looked back through the glass. In the room without the light. The team swept the lower basement one final time, rechecking the crawl spaces, the storage chambers, even the crate vents. Nothing. Until Ranger stopped again. Not in the tunnel, but near the gymnasium wall, right beneath another school poster. This one read, "Your future is bright." The image showed children in graduation caps, tossing their diplomas in the air. Grady gently peeled it back. And there it was. Another seam, another hidden panel. Morales helped pry it open. Inside, a narrow stairwell descending into what felt like pure silence. There were no lights, no power, only the faint smell of dust and something else. Pine, like an old Christmas box forgotten in a basement for years. They descended carefully, flashlights sweeping across the walls. And at the bottom, a small room, no bigger than a janitor's closet. No soundproofing, no foam, just bricks. And in the corner, a boy, thin, pale, eyes closed, hands resting gently on a stuffed toy, worn and faded. He didn't move. Grady rushed over, dropping to his knees. Hey, buddy, you're okay, you're safe." The boy stirred, flinched at the light, then opened his eyes slowly. He didn't speak, But when he saw Ranger, something in him relaxed. His hand reached out and rested on the dog's neck. And for the first time in God knows how long, he smiled. Back above ground, medics confirmed that the boy, Eli Matthews, age 8, had been missing for over a year. His parents had moved away 6 months ago after losing hope. But now he was safe. He didn't talk much, just whispered once to the nurse as she covered him in warm blankets. The dog found me. Hours later, as the school emptied, Grady and Morales stood outside near the cruiser. They had recovered 11 children, identified a network that spanned years, unmasked a man who was supposed to protect the school, but instead hid something unthinkable beneath its foundation. Morales looked at Ranger. "You know he never stopped," she said. Grady nodded. He was the first to bark and the last to leave. As Ranger sat at Grady's feet, watching the sunrise break over the school roof, it became clear. Some heroes don't carry a badge. Some don't need words. Some just wear a vest with 3 letters. K9. Thank you for following this emotional and intense journey. We hope Ranger's story touched your heart the way it touched ours. What would you do if your dog started barking at a wall that was never supposed to open? Let us know in the comments below. And never stop believing in those who can't speak but always protect.